Malcolm X is amongst the most influential African Americans in history, if not one of the most influential Americans, period. Born within a notorious period of racism, Malcolm's harsh childhood molded him into an angry, opinionated force of nature, who stirred the emotions of thousands with his indictment of the white Western populace. In an astounding journey of life, Malcolm X was almost always in a state of transformation. His greatest change came when he performed the pillar of Hajj. Such was the impact of the pilgrimage upon his life that he abandoned the heretical doctrine of the Nation of Islam, submitting to the Sunnah of Islam in belief and in practice. He also dropped his racist views, instead understanding the unity of man when under the submission of Allah. Born on May 19, 1925 in the town of Omaha, Nebraska, Malcolm was the fourth of 7 children, of which all grew up in a household that celebrated Black pride, and were immersed in the Pan-African movement. Inspired by the teachings of Marcus Garvey, he and his family developed a strong conviction of rectifying the affairs of the impoverished African American people.
Malcolm's father was a Garveyite. He believed in the principles of Marcus Garvey, who believed in a return to Africa for blacks who were living in America, who had come to America as slaves. He believed that they should return back. But Malcolm very early on learned about the violence of the United States of America. He learned very early that black people were not accepted. He learned that to be a quote-unquote uppity black man, to be a black man like his father was, outspoken against racism, outspoken for the concerns and needs of his congregation, meant that you would be put into the path of violence.
Malcolm grew further apart from his Caucasian neighbours after the death of his father Earl, who was knocked down by a streetcar. It was suggested that the death was a deliberate act of the white supremacist organisation, the Black Legion. Malcolm's childhood hit further tragedy when his mother Louise fell into a nervous breakdown when unable to cope with the difficulties of raising a large family.
His mother really didn't cope once her husband had been killed, which I think in a way reinforces the notion that Mr. Little in fact had been lynched and not just run over, which is what some people would like us believe.
She had a whole family to sort of raise. She was then put into an asylum and the family was split up.
And so growing up as an orphan, so to speak, on the state actually is a traumatic experience for many people. But we also recognize that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was an orphan himself. So orphans have a type of sensitivity and they're very focused people because they don't necessarily take things for granted. They don't have their parents around them. And so it gives them a type of consciousness. Their eyes are wide open and they're able to accomplish in many cases more than people who have parents who are waiting for everything to be done and they're spoon-fed. So Malcolm was not spoon-fed. He had to deal with reality from a young age.
Malcolm excelled in junior high school, but became disillusioned when a teacher put down his chances of being a successfully educated black man.
He goes to a school that is largely a white school and excels against all odds. And yet when he goes to his favorite teacher and he speaks to his favorite teacher, and his teacher asks him, well, Malcolm, you're doing so well. What kind of career have you thought for yourself? And Malcolm says in his autobiography that, I responded really without thinking, but I thought, I would like to become a lawyer. And his teacher dissuades him.
If you want to be what you've written, Malcolm, as your goal, you want to be a lawyer, well, that's not a realistic goal for a Negro. And you have to be realistic. You're a Negro. Maybe you could become a carpenter.
That is the childhood of Malcolm X. I mean, you see this bright young man from a broken home. His father has been murdered. His family has been torn apart by violence and by the authorities. Excels in school, yet turns in his late teens and early 20s to petty crime. It's a remarkable transformation, but it is a transformation that is emblematic of racist America in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, even to the 60s.
Over time, he became involved in various crimes, and at the age of 20 was sentenced to 8 to 10 years for breaking and entering.
Malcolm goes through his life and he goes, why am I in jail? A white man put me in here. Why did I become a hustler? Because a white man told me that I couldn't become a lawyer. Who killed my father? White people. So he kind of sees an illogical connection, which on the face of it seems quite natural, white people are the cause of his problems.
And in many cases, and this is what was happening in the big cities in the United States, is that African Americans were forced to be involved in crime, in hustling, in order to gain a living, because the normal job type situation was very restricted. And so you find that most African Americans, the highest level they're reaching is working on railroads and as servants or porters. So you're never able to really gain that much out of the time that you put in. And so the hustler, the pimp, the drug dealer, the one who's taking the numbers, who's involved in crime and robbing people's houses and whatever, that person can gain a lot of wealth in a short period of time.
During his sentence, Malcolm became a member of the Nation of Islam, and after his release in '52, became one of their prominent members. He was instrumental in spreading their ideals of black supremacy, shunning the integration aims of the civil rights movement.
What makes the so-called Negro unable to stand on his own 2 feet? He has no self-confidence. He has no proud confidence in his own race, because the white man destroyed your and my past, destroyed our knowledge of our culture. And by having destroyed it, now we don't know we have any achievements, any accomplishments. And as long as you can be convinced that you never did anything, you can never do anything.
Are you prepared to go into the United Nations at this point and ask that charges be brought against the United States for its treatment of American Negroes?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, please. I think you're right in my chair. The audience will have to be quiet. Yes, as I pointed out when I was during my traveling, that nations look, African nations and Asian nations and Latin American nations look very hypocritical when they stand up in the United Nations condemning the racist practices of South Africa and that which is practiced by Portugal and Angola, and saying nothing in the UN about the racist practices that are manifest every day against Negroes in this society. Even in South Africa, those Africans aren't faced with bayonets and aren't faced with police dogs. I would be not a man. If I was in a position to bring it in front of the United Nations and didn't do so, I wouldn't be a man.
Malcolm, do you intend to lead the charge in the United Nations?
Well, I find that to say you're going to lead something creates a lot of hostility, division, jealousy, and envy. I hope to work with any group of leaders or any group of organizations to do whatever is necessary to see that this problem is brought before the United Nations.
Have you had any commitments from any nations in Africa to support you in such a move?
I would rather not say at this time. But one thing I found in my travels, all of them look upon us as their long-lost brother.
You realize the implication is that you have had such commitments when you say...
This is your interpretation of what I said. One thing that I found in all of my travels was that all of the Africans, not only the Africans, but the Asians and the Muslims, look upon us as their long-lost brothers. And America had actually tricked many of them into a hands-off policy by giving them the impression that she was honestly trying to do something to solve the problem. My argument over there was designed to prove that it is impossible for the United States government to solve the race problem. It's impossible.